So as we wrap up our discussion on the transgender stuff, I just want to establish how ubiquitous this is and for how long this agenda has been in place, okay? And how much power and control would be necessary to maintain this, because it's been reintroduced. I'm going to show you information here. For over 100 years, they've been pushing transgender stuff in one way or another. Obviously, it dates back older than that, like I covered in the first lecture. But I just want to establish in TV shows, media, etc., constantly this emasculation of males, putting them in dresses, showing you transgender people, trying to reprogram your thinking about this, constantly showing you how harmless this is, until boom, 2015, it's a marked social movement that switches into these people need to be protected and promoted across every sphere of society. It's not going to be as technical as previous lectures or anything like that. I just want to touch on some things and a little bit of the subliminal stuff that can be executed. But I just want to touch on some things to just impress upon you the scope of this extends for a far longer time period and under a far greater influence than most people, I think, realize. And with some retrospection, you can see just how ubiquitous this is. So let's just cruise through this here. And when you search for transgender sort of topics, or you just search transgender in a movie, you get articles from LA Times. There's all this stuff about Taylor Swift casting a trans person. The Advocate, which we will touch on when we talk about homosexuality. So all these news agencies are covering Taylor Swift hiring a trans actor. Again, why does this matter? Men's Health is telling you about transgender movies you should see. Netflix is saying, here's 13 movies that feature trans people. Good Housekeeping is telling you about transgender stuff. Queer movies, trans coming out scenes from out.com. Again, more MSN, Joe, all this Taylor Swift stuff. Newsbusters, like, how is this newsworthy? Forbes is telling you Martin Scorsese produced a film directed by a queer person. Who cares? 70 celebrities who are actually transgender. Deadpool's new interest is non-binary. Sci-fi with LGBTQ main characters. And within the same vein, it's saying it's a problem that men are still getting 2/3 of speaking roles in top grossing films. It's not about hiring whoever fits the role that we're writing or anything like that. It's about making the numbers match. Most important LGBTQ representation. Boys Don't Cry still inspires admiration and debate. And then it sort of kind of goes off the rails because DuckDuckGo is a terrible search engine and it's getting worse. So we have this history of drag on screen. One of the first things to pop up is vaudeville and burlesque. The only comedic roles were only in comedic roles impersonating men. Men still performed drag for comedic or shock value. The term drag tends to originate in British theater slang to describe men wearing women's clothes. As explained on the website National Center of Transgender Equality, drag has since evolved as a gender-bending art form. And then they're asking RuPaul his feelings on it. So Julian Elting's first musical comedy performance on Broadway led to some of the first representations of cross-dressing women. This is 1904. So Broadway, even prior to Hollywood, Broadway was pushing this concept. Female impersonator, 1917. That's clearly a guy. Again, more Broadway nonsense. Victor and Victoria. And then the Hays Code in 34 drives drag back underground in North America, but Europe is not phased. So the Hays Code had to be passed to basically slow down the types of sexual imagery that was put before the American public, which I believe is the first of many lessons in learning that you can't boil the frog too fast or it jumps out of the pot. So they overplayed their hand a little bit and people figured it out. They realized that they needed a much longer buildup, a much more sustained, involving a lot more subliminal imagery and changes in social movements first to prevent counter movements so nobody can criticize you before they can enact this stuff. And that process takes, decades, but is accelerated much faster whenever you have, entertainment media like radios, film, TV shows, and eventually the modern internet, which you can accelerate things really fast now. Potentially, it helps explain why things were so dramatically different. They're not that different anymore in the United States compared to Europe as far as sexual mores in that context. And we see this New Woman Wash Day, feminist, basically this was a feminist poster listed as a humorous picture in 1897. So they have the woman in pants and dressed up like a man, and the man's sort of got this fluffy shirt on, and it looks like he's wearing an apron or a skirt or something. So as far back as 1897, published by Strohmeyer and Wyman, were pushing this stuff, and they were tying it together with feminism. So whenever people, if you're a feminist, fine, you're a feminist, whatever. But whenever people say, I think in the early 2000s, there was a lot of people talking about feminism being for everyone, and feminism is good for men and women. Why are you portraying an image like this in 1897 then? I don't think it'd be great if there was a man looking like that down at his wife either, if the roles were reversed. I don't think trying to dominate your spouse is a healthy thing regardless of the gender or sexes of the people involved. But if this is your starting point here, what makes you think it was ever about equality? If this was 126 years ago, these are the images that we're producing. And then whenever you search for this, history and social studies for grades 9 through 12, when you search for this image, a lesson plan built around this concept by Kelly Tabor Hahn in 2009, so this is 14 years ago, and they're talking about how do factors such as race, class, immigration status, and marital status affect a woman's place in society. So all the things they're constantly trying to keep you thinking about and upset about are all built into your lesson plan that you're teaching kids from grades 9 through 12 before they even get into college. So we start with the fact that what did we observe in so many of the transsexual histories? These individuals were describing their childhood. And it was basically an absent, uninvolved, sort of incompetent father. And so you think about, for those that are younger, the phenomenon of the Simpsons television show, it was probably the most ubiquitously bannered, celebrated all over the place in the early 90s. You couldn't get away from images of Bart Simpson, the rebellious child, and all sorts of stuff. And in this show, I haven't seen an episode of this show in a very long period of time, but in this show you have episodes in which Bart's cross-dressing, you have episodes in which, and we'll probably show a clip from that later, where John Waters makes an appearance, who we talked about in connection to the Christine Jorgensen stuff. And also there's all of the, predictive programming stuff. So we have the Simpsons demonstrating the prototypical parent that would be prototypical father that would be completely ineffective in preventing any sort of masculinized admiration in the household. We see how much this is accelerated when we get to a more contemporary TV show, Rick and Morty, in which the father is so excessively emasculated, it goes off the rails level of emasculation of the father figure. And in fact, I actually discovered recently there's an episode in which the father exists in an alternate reality where he's this masculine figure that has weapons and is surviving in a wasteland. And then years later, they retroactively went back in an episode just to kill that one masculine form of the father figure. So we'll just watch these couple of clips here really quickly.
I love these lazy Saturdays.
It's Wednesday, Homer.
Work! I love these real Saturdays. They're so relaxing. Not like that fake Saturday that almost got me fired.
Is this all we're going to do today?
Absolutely.
Bad person. Bad.
Ooh, great plan, Jerry.
Jerry, turn around. Straighten your back. Bend your knees. Bend them. Square your shoulders. Now take a deep breath.
As we've seen, I mean, in this, there's thousands of examples of that you can observe. You can see Married with Children, which we will touch on as a cultural change agent for this transgender stuff. Sort of emasculated, dejected, ineffectual father. We see Modern Family. The dad's a goofy dork and basically the wife's in charge of the marriage. Yeah, there's 2 or 3 episodes here or there where he's competent, but the majority of the time, he's an idiot. Go back and look at TV shows in the 50s. Compare the fathers. Are they disrespectful to their wives? Are they mocking their wives? Are they treating their wives with derision? Not really. There might be some comments that might be eyebrow raising now, but compared to the way fathers are treated in modern media now, it's not even close. And that's not to, sidestep any of the, potential domestic abuse type stuff that individuals have suffered or women have suffered. I'm not saying that doesn't exist. That's also stupid, but that's not the point. The point that I'm making is within popular media, they've been showing pathetic men in father figures like, look at King of Queens as a fat, lazy slob. Look at Everybody Loves Raymond. But as the show goes on, you can see the wife get increasingly hostile and he gets increasingly miserable in his marriage. They've been programming this for decades. And it's not like watching a guy be miserable is that funny. So, but as far as direct transgender/transvestite stuff, they've been putting this stuff in movies for years. And they always position it as, look how silly or funny this is. Look how non-threatening and harmless this is. So don't worry if you observe it at some point in the future. Don't investigate it. Don't worry about it. Don't be concerned for your kids. It's this harmless, funny, silly thing. And we'll see movies in the 50s and we already saw examples even in the very early 1900s peddling this stuff. So everyone for decades, multiple generations, has been exposed to this concept of drag, transvestites, and even transgenderism. Everybody has a familiarity with it. The shock value's gone. Your ears don't perk up. You don't have the same potential resistance to it because it's just been this harmless thing in the background for decades. Look at this silly thing. Don't worry about it. Harmless thing in the background for decades. And all that capital, and that's how I would encourage people to think about this, there have been decades worth of emotional, intellectual, and financial capital invested into this concept that wasn't really cashed in fully until around 2015, when they passed laws that says you couldn't do conversion therapy, and when they put Bruce Jenner all over all those magazines in a dress. And then boom, all the social media, everything, trans, everything, all the time after that.
Have I got anything to tell you? What happened? I'm engaged. Congratulations. Who's the lucky girl? I am. What? Osgood proposed to me. We're planning a June wedding. What are you talking about? You can't marry Osgood. You think he's too old for me?
Jerry, you can't be serious.
Why not? He keeps marrying girls all the time.
But you're not a girl, you're a guy. And why would a guy want to marry a guy?
Security.
Jerry, you better lie down. You're not well.
Will you stop treating me like a child? I'm not stupid. I know there's a problem.
I'll say there is.
His mother. We need her approval. But I'm not worried because I don't smoke.
Jerry, there's another problem.
Like what?
Like, what are you going to do on your honeymoon?
We've been discussing that. He wants to go to the Riviera, but I kind of lean towards Niagara Falls.
Jerry, you're out of your mind. How are you going to get away with this? I don't expect it to last, Joe. I'll tell him the truth when the time comes.
Like when?
Like right after the ceremony.
Oh.
Then we get a quick annulment, he makes a nice settlement on me, and I keep getting those alimony checks every month.
Jerry, listen to me. Listen to me. There are laws, conventions. It's just not being done.
Shh, Joe, this may be my last chance to marry a millionaire.
Jerry,
Huh?
Jerry, will you take my advice? Forget about the whole thing, will you? Just keep telling yourself you're a boy. You're a boy.
I'm a boy.
That's the boy.
Oh, I'm a boy. I'm a boy. I wish I were dead. I'm a boy. I'm a boy. Oh, boy, am I a boy. Now, what am I going to do about my engagement present?
What engagement present?
Osgood gave me a bracelet.
So this is Some Like It Hot in 1959. Look how goofy and bizarre this actor is acting. This is Jack Lemmon, by the way, for those who aren't familiar. And he had a very storied, highly successful career after this film. And he did have a career before this movie. But if you think about it, you participate in this movie. It's promoted, popular, etc., and for those that watch the Edward Bernays lecture, you know if something's popular, it doesn't necessarily have to be because it's good. It's because of, social factors, right? Edward Bernays saying, okay, we have all this green dye and we don't have any way to sell it. Let's just make green super popular and people will buy it off of us. It's easier to create a market. And after this person's career takes off. I would encourage you to look at actors and actresses and see, you'll hear this story over and over again. They were broke and desperate and all this kind of stuff, and then they got this small role doing this indie thing or something, and then they got their big break after that. Yeah, you know why? They were completely desperate, and you see this so often with actresses. They're completely desperate. As an unknown, they do some R-rated movie where they have to take their top off or something. This went on all the time. Or in movies like this or something like that, you'll see they have to, a lot of people will play like a gay character or something or whatever else. And then right after that, coincidentally, this broke, desperate person who will do anything, their career takes off. A la Harvey Weinstein. This has been going on for a long time. You bend the knee and do the cultural conditioning things we want you to, and then we'll explode your career after that. Or we have something on you, you're already famous. If you don't do what we say that you should do, then we can destroy your career. Look at somebody like The Rock. He has his $7 production company. He only had $7 left. He was totally desperate. And then what happens? He gets cast to play in movies. They show that he's got a decent on-screen presence. They make him do kids' movies for a decade, including The Tooth Fairy. They put this jacked guy in a tutu. And then after that, after he's shown, he'll do what you tell him for a decade and he'll play ball. They make him the biggest movie star in the world. And of course, there's other factors that go into that as far as cultural change agents and stuff like that. But let's look at yet another movie with famous actors all dressed up in drag here.
Impromptu surprise for you. The Haynes Sisters.
Sisters, there were never such devoted sisters. Never had to have a chaperone, no sir. I'm here to keep my eye on her, caring, sharing every little thing that we are wearing. When a certain gentleman arrived from Rome, she wore the dress and I stayed home.
Where are you going?
I'm going to take a shower.
Oh, Susan, don't leave me here like this.
Don't be impatient, David. We'll talk it over after I've finished. Everything's going to be all right.
Everything's going to be all right. Oh, certainly, everything's going to be all right. Everything's going to be... Oh, I'm losing my mind, that's all. Roaming around Connecticut without any clothes on. I'll go crazy. How can all these things happen to just one person? Susan, where are you?
Huh?
Susan, will you come out of there and help me find some clothes, or must I come in and get you?
Oh, David, you wouldn't.
Oh, yes, I would. Oh, well, maybe I wouldn't. Susan, Where's the gardener's room?
Why?
Because he must have some clothes. Where's his room?
Claude, I can't hear you.
You can hear what you want to hear.
No, really, I can't. What'd you say?
I just said... Oh, never mind. I'll find the place myself. The gardener must have clothes. Clothes are clothes.
Claude was in town.
Well, he couldn't have taken all his clothes with him.
Oh, yes, he could.
Of all the conceited, spoiled little scatterbrains. My goodness, the man who gets you is going to have a lifetime of misery. Everything's going to be all right. Yes, everything's going to be... What do you want?
Well, who are you?
Who are you?
What, who are you?
What do you want?
Well, who are you?
This is 1938, and the humorous situation, he's wearing this girlish nightgown. And the writing is actually really clever in this movie. Again, younger audiences aren't going to know who this is. This is Cary Grant. He was considered the, premier, pre-George Clooney, bigger deal than George. The Hollywood it guy was Cary Grant, okay? And they're making him put on this, nightgown in a humorous situation sort of thing. So they've been exploiting this for a long time, and we will touch on later just how well they understand how subtext is understood by an audience without understanding it. We'll explore the depths of that. And again, even with the Freud stuff, we talked about how it's imperative for changing people's minds and ideas that they aren't aware that that's what you're trying to do, because they'll put their defenses up. So what's one of the most effective techniques to do that? Humor is a very effective one. If you can create a very elaborate humor situation that makes people laugh. I'm not saying that there isn't anything about this is funny, that's funny or humorous. And you get that endorphin rush from humorous things, and then it's associated with what? The memory of this guy in a dress, right? And it's the same thing with sexual stuff, by the way, because it also releases lots of feel-good chemicals in your brain. So if I can engender a bunch of sexual feelings in your mind by showing you images of women and then subsequently telling you that it's actually a man, you get the idea.
Honey, I'm so happy. Oh, come here.
I knew you'd understand.
Is this gonna hurt? Don't whine, just relax.
Are you sure?
Just remember, pain is beauty. Okay, here we go. Take a deep breath. Instant eye lift.
Wow. And you'll never see the strings. They'll be under the wig.
The man has 5 o'clock shadow at 8:30 a.m. and you're worried about strings?
All right, we'll start with makeup.
I'm not gonna wax.
Don't worry, we'll just lightly spackle.
I feel like Gloria Swanson.
You look like her mother.
I'm ready for my close-up, Mr. DeMille.
Okay, everyone. Let's pray.
I hope you are using jungle rape because that is the only color I love.
Matches your lips.
God bless you. You know, I'm feeling fabulous because I met this beautiful Cuban. Every night is like the Bay of Pigs. I can't lie to you. It's beautiful with him. I don't know. This will scare the children. Do you think so? I don't know. Maybe this was too much.
Okay, that's about enough of that. But again, popular movies in the 90s. And it's basically, it really does keep in line with the trajectory that we've seen. So many of these movies feature divorce and single mothers constantly. Well before the divorce rates were that bad, by the way, there were movies showing divorce over and over and over again. And in this movie, his ex-wife is Sally Fields. I don't know if you know what Sally Fields looks like, but not stereotypical, prototypical bombshell, let's say. And the love interest after she's married and has children that wants to settle down with her after she divorces Robin Williams is Pierce Brosnan. So in this movie, you have Robin Williams dressing up in drag as a silly, goofy thing. And you have the concurrent message that, hey, ladies, you're going to divorce goofy Robin Williams, and Pierce Brosnan is going to emerge from the shadows as a successful man and want to raise your 2 kids. And you look like Sally Fields. So, again, it's funny how the dual programming works here, but this is not, but again, we're seeing the same thing. Humorous situation, look how funny it is. You can also think of Dustin Hoffman's Tootsie. Decades before this movie, I believe is in the 1970s, where you have this going on. It's a constant theme in films to do this, emasculating, dressing up like a woman, homosexual overtones, undertones, transvestite, transsexual. It's been constant. You've been grown up, you've been raised on this your entire life, regardless of, unless you're 100 years old, literally, and even then you've encountered some of it at a young age. Unless you're 100 years old, you have examples from your childhood, multiple examples from your childhood with this programming involved in it. This is not an accident.
Someone taken her order yet?
Oh yeah, she did. He did. She? I'm sorry, I'm new. I don't...
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just ordered a beer. You're straight, I get it.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the incomparable Helena Handbasket.
Hello, darlings.
And there's Daddy.
I feel pretty, oh so pretty. I feel pretty and witty and...
That can't be your father.
Believe me, I've been saying that for years. Oh my God.
So after Seinfeld and The Simpsons, this show comes out and it becomes the biggest phenom show at the time period of the 90s, Friends. And people still have it on, and it's one of the most like played in the background TV shows constantly, whatever. In the first season, it features one of the main characters getting divorced and his wife becomes a lesbian. All this stuff with a transgendered father is ubiquitously forced in it. They all have casual relationships throughout the entire show that's played for laughs, etc., etc. All the same cultural agenda stuff. But this is in the 90s. We're making sure that the most popular show for years, essentially, this show, on television, is exposing people repeatedly to these ideas. Again, this is intentional. You can look up the creators of these shows, by the way. You can look up the producers of these movies and the heads of these studios, by the way. So there's no reason not to do that. But we see that the cultural agenda remains consistent at all points. And the lesson that the character in this show has to learn is to be accepting of it. His problem is that he's not accepting enough. And that's always the problem in all of these shows. And it's the same thing in Family Guy. It's the same thing in that other show that the guy did with the big chin, American Dad. Right, the alien's the homosexual. He's constantly emasculating the father figure in the show. Multiple times over, the father is discouraged at how promiscuous the daughter is, and it's played for laughs. And there's even an episode in that show where he literally transforms into a woman. There's literally an episode of that show where he transforms into a woman. So all these popular, and most of them Friends less so, but most of these shows are primarily male audiences because that's who they're needing to convince that this stuff isn't a big deal. So for women, it's programmed you need to advance all these causes. For men, it's usually programmed, don't worry, it's not a big deal. Just let it grow in the background. Trust me, it's totally harmless. And you see this over and over and over again. And of course, children's cartoons. Bugs Bunny in Drag, #1. The Looney Tunes show, but it's just the cross-dressing. Bugs in Drag, #2. Cartoons in Drag, Looney Tunes shorts. Cartoons in Drag. The Big Snooze 5 cross-dressing pursuit. Again, Looney Tunes, Incognito Bugs, Tiny Toon Adventures in Drag. They've been doing this in the cartoons, cross-dressing sheep, and literally titling the video like that. They've been pushing this stuff for a long time.
Where is Bugs?
Bugs Bunny.
You know him?
Oh, I know him. Bugs Bunny is the worst man I've ever met.
Bugs Bunny is a saint.
That's what he'd have you believe. Let me guess. You met him on a tennis court? Oh, unbelievable. Let me give you a little piece of advice. Girl to girl, if you don't want your heart shattered into a million pieces, you'll break up with Bugs Bunny today. Buzzard is two-faced. You naughty, naughty boy.
Oh, no, no. No.
This looks like a job for Super Rabbit. Whoop, pardon me. Wrong costume.
And of course, the comments are turned off. Gee, I wonder why. So then we come to the TV show 30 Rock, and we'll actually use clips from this show and again in subsequent lectures as well, because it's really a gold mine, because everybody involved in this TV show is liberal, okay? Tina Fey's liberal, Baldwin's liberal. All these people are liberals, okay? And this show's on 10, 15 years ago. Probably ended about 10 years ago and started like 15 years ago. And it goes to show you just how rapidly the agenda changes, because the types of jokes that they make are so far outside of bounds of what's considered socially acceptable, even by the right at this point. It tells you how far things have shifted, but they're still in line with the same agenda of constantly showing men sort of cross-dressing and showing it as harmless. So remember, all the way back to the 1930s with Cary Grant, this is harmless. We go through into 59 with Jack Lemmon, this is harmless. Into The Simpsons and Friends, and through the 90s, this is harmless and silly, this is harmless and silly, this is harmless and silly. They've been doing that this entire time, okay? Harmless and silly agenda they've been pushing. And notice the terminology that they're allowed, they themselves see no problem in using not that long ago compared to what would be socially acceptable now. So let's look at this here.
Yeah, well, you can't solve all your problems by shooting someone or setting a stranger on fire. Would Oprah do that?
Lemon does make a good point, Tracy. What would Oprah do?
Each of you is here because you were insensitive to a coworker, okay? You might have used one of the words I call the uh-oh words, such as slut, hoe, biatch, queer burger, fagatron, gay bird, the word for black in any language, nero, noir, schwarz, negro, kanchan sec. So, what else? What else can we not call each other?
How about sweaty greaseball?
Ooh, very good. That's highly offensive.
Person of color.
I guess if you say it like that.
Sneaky Taiwanese tranny who stole my watch.
Oh, yes! These words are terrible.
Again, more contemporary movies constantly pushing this. You have John Travolta and Hairspray, and everybody's making this huge deal out of that. And how great it was that he's dressed up like a woman. And, of course, all the Medea movies. Now, this is, I mean, that's a straight-up man. Like, it's so incredibly obvious. And, of course, there's been this long history of this taking place where they're dressing, I mean, as we've seen, they're dressing up all sorts of men in drag. They did seem to have at least for a significant period of time, where they were very fixated on putting black guys in drag. You had Jamie Foxx, you had Martin Lawrence, you had Eddie Murphy. It was like this thing where in order to be a super successful, world famous whatever, they're going to make sure at some point to put you in a dress and throw a wig on your head. All right, so if you look at feature films with transgender people, they actually leave quite a few out. So you have the first one, 1953, Glenn or Glenda. So as soon as Christine Jorgensen comes out, they make a movie about her. That fast. No qualms, no reservations, don't care about offending anybody, nothing. Okay? The 1954 movie, and then it's 13 years until there's another one. Why? Because there's not a demand for this style of movie at the time. Beyond the Valley of the Dolls in 1970, this was actually written by Roger Ebert. For those who are unfamiliar, he was a famous movie critic back in the day, and one of the main people that people would go to determine, whether a movie was good or not. And he's writing this movie that features a transgendered person. Christine Jorgensen's story, exactly what you would expect it to be. And then we have 1970, Myra Breckinridge with Raquel Welch. So if you look at this movie, they're making this movie in 1970 based on Gore Vidal's novel of the same name. So film was directed by Michael Same, featured Raquel Welch in the title role, starred John Huston, Mae West, Farrah Fawcett, Rex Reed. Tom Selleck made his film debut as one of Letitia's studs. You cooperate with them on movies like this, and then later will give you starring roles. Myron Breckinridge flies to Copenhagen to get a sex change operation, becoming the beautiful Myra. So they're exposing audiences in 1970 to the concept that this Raquel Welch, okay, this is young Raquel Welch, that this person actually started out as a dude. Do you think even in 2023, the average male is going to get an outcome like this in terms of appearance? Yeah, no. Okay, but they're using someone who was known and famous for their appearance and drew a lot of attention from men, advanced this idea. And for those who aren't familiar who Gore Vidal is, American writer, his novels and essays interrogated the social and cultural sexual norms he perceived as driving American life. So all these people are anti-cultural norms, heavily involved in politics, sought office twice as the Democratic Party candidate, first in 1960 to the U.S. House of Representatives. He was born in an upper-class political family. His third novel, The City and the Pillar, offended the literary, political, and moral sensibilities of the conservative book reviewers. Yet none of this stopped him, and he was able to go on to create stories for feature films that got produced, as he dispassionately presented male homosexual relationships. But all recreated the imperial world of Julian the Apostate. In Julian, he was a Roman emperor who attempted to reestablish Roman polytheism to counter Christianity. In social satire, Myra Breckinridge explores the mutability of gender roles and sexual orientation as being social constructs established by social mores. So this guy in 1968 was doing the gender as a social construct thing, which we saw is already tied to the Magnus Hirschfelds of the world, etc., etc. So they talk about his life, and he's all about challenging all these social norms and all this kind of stuff. But if you look at his personal relationships, it talks about his politics, criticism of George Bush, feud with Buckley, all this kind of stuff. And then he was affiliated, he was asked about the Polanski rape case, and he said, "I really don't care. Am I going to sit and weep every time a young hooker feels that she's been taken advantage of?" And this is in reference to the statutory rape of a 13-year-old girl in Hollywood. He was one of 34 intellectuals who publicly joined a campaign waged by Scientologists against the German government, alleging that Scientologists were treated the same way a Nazi regime persecuted the Jews. So he was very much in favor of Scientology. And if you look at his relationships, he enjoyed telling his sexual exploits of friends. He said he slept with Fred Astaire when he first moved to Hollywood, and also a young Dennis Hopper. And he was married and divorced multiple times. So the same guy that thinks we need to challenge all these sexual mores and we need to do all this stuff couldn't have a stable relationship, as we've seen. Writer for The Advocate and all this kind of stuff. And as far as subversive signaling and stuff like that goes, he served as one of several script doctors on Ben-Hur in 1959. Vidal rewrote significant portions of the script to resolve ambiguities of character motivation, specifically to clarify the enmity between the Jewish protagonist, Judah Ben-Hur, the Roman antagonist, Messala, who had been close boyhood friends. In exchange for rewriting the Ben-Hur screenplay on location in Italy, Vidal negotiated the early termination of his 4-year contract with MGM. In 36 years later, in the celluloid closet, Vidal explained that Messala's failed attempt at resuming their homosexual relationship motivated this political enmity between Ben-Hur and Messala. Vidal said that Boyd was aware of the homosexual subtext of the scene, and that the director and producer-screenwriter agreed to keep Heston ignorant to the subtext, lest he refused to play the scene. In turn, on learning of that explanation, Heston said that Vidal had contributed little to the script of Ben-Hur. Despite Vidal's resolution of the character's motivation, the Screenwriters Guild assigned formal screenwriter credit to Carl Tunberg. Why? Because it doesn't advance the plot at all. He was literally just trying to subtly program in 1959 that there is a pre-existing homosexual relationship. They just brought him in to create a subtextual idea that some members of the audience might pick up on, that there was something gay going on. And this has been going on for decades, where they intentionally do this and then they deny it for decades. And then when the climate has changed, they say, look what champions we were of this or that agenda. So that's who we're dealing with here. Returning to the list here. So that's 1970. We're pushing this stuff. Day of the Locust, Dog Day Afternoon, the Rocky Horror Picture Show, many people are familiar with. And Brad cheats on his fiancée with an alien transvestite. So, and you think about it, that is in keeping with sort of the transgender fantasy of being accepted as a female by getting heterosexual males to sleep with you. And the enhancement of that fantasy is getting a ostensibly, I would argue maybe not actually, but ostensibly heterosexual male to cheat on their actual female fiance or spouse with you. Then you're really a woman. Again, Fun with Dick and Jane. They're pushing this stuff. In Alien, they have an extra where they went back and they said that they established that Lambert had the gender altered. Life of Brian, they have this stuff. World According to Garp. Sleepaway Camp, which is a horror movie. And basically there's a big reveal at the end of this movie. Don't watch this movie, by the way. It's just gross. I obviously haven't seen it, front to back or anything like that, but I know what's in it. Be forewarned. So there's all these murders that happen. This person is picked on, and there's like a death after a boating accident. And at the very end, you find out that this person that was dressed as a girl the whole time, and you think is a girl, stands up and is nude from the waist down and reveals to the audience that it's in fact been a male the whole time. Okay? That's how shocking they're trying to do this stuff to audiences, and also how traumatic the suggestion is to potential audiences. Silence of the Lambs, obviously Ted Levine is playing a transvestite. The Crying Game. So this person, Jay Davidson, was in The Crying Game. Again, they're all this, and it's always the same stuff. Themes of race, sex, sexuality. It's against the backdrop of Northern Ireland. And it's about the IRA. And then there's this person this is very clearly a man. Like, there's no way you're going to deceive somebody into not realizing this is a man. Okay? And won an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor, and then was never heard of again. So got all this publicity for pretending to be a chick, then reveals at the end, of course, it's actually a guy, and the guy reacts violently and then later apologizes and they reconcile. Because the right thing to do is basically be in a homosexual relationship with a person dressed up like a woman and not be angry about it. Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, and you'll see Wikipedia, anytime that they portray a trans person negatively, they talk about how this was heavily criticized. I don't think it was actually at the time. You're retroactively going back and saying it was heavily criticized, but if you look at the clips that we've seen, even as far up into 2010, nobody was heavily criticizing 30 Rock for using the word tranny. Nobody was heavily, and we'll go down and look here at some other movies in 2010 that were saying this stuff. I highly doubt they went back to 1994 and were heavily criticizing somebody for making fun of transsexuals. Escape from LA, Boys Don't Cry, Hilary Swank plays Brandon and then career takes off afterward. Trans America in 2005, Powder Blue, post-op or pre-op trans woman prostitute shares an unexpected emotional bond with a priest, Charlie. Ticked off trannies with knives in 2010. And this is a revenge transploitation film. GLAAD came out and stated it misrepresents the lives of transgender women. Well, we actually did see in previous lectures that they are, relative to their cohort, disproportionately more likely to participate in prostitution and disproportionately more likely to participate in violent crime. So the idea that this isn't possible, I don't remember hearing about this in 2010. But Wikipedia is going out of their way to say about how awful this is, and they're giving us GLAAD's opinion on stuff. Do you know how many millions of Christians and Muslims were offended by TV shows like Family Guy, The Simpsons, South Park, all when they came out? How many letters were written, campaigns were started? There was controversy over that stuff. And guess what? They're still around. Why? Because they're supported by the establishment. So when you sit here and there was this controversy about that, nobody cared. What, you're telling me the 0.05% of trans people around, some of them even didn't care. You're telling me that those people who, as we've seen, are disproportionately unemployed or underemployed, disproportionately drug addicted, etc., in and of themselves, not very powerful, you're telling me that they had enough clout to generate enough criticism of this stuff, even back in 2010, which was not that long ago? No. Then they come out with a Danish Girl about Lily Elbe in 2015. Why? That's the same year that we see Zucker get taken out of his role, and it's the same year you see the removal of any sort of conversion therapy, and then we see a ramping up of trans stuff relative to previous years. 2020, boom, 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 boom. West Side Story. They're remaking lots of stuff, and they're adding in all these trans things after the fact. Why is this agenda pushed so heavily? Just from an organic standpoint, it makes no sense unless there's a agenda that very powerful individuals are trying to set up with this stuff. Finally, we come to TV shows here just to show how ubiquitous it is. There's no way you're going to be watching American television at any point in the last 50 years and not be exposed to this concept. And that goes back to the John C. Lilly lecture that I touched on in reprogramming the biocomputer and metaprogramming, reprogramming the biocomputer. What did he say the first step was to reprogramming? You have to make people aware. It doesn't really matter how. And I mean, their method of choice is first start with subliminal. So as we saw with Ben-Hur, you literally bring a writer on to put some subliminal messaging into one scene to suggest to people that subconsciously there might be a homosexual relationship going on. So it starts with that. Then it transitions to the silly. Hey, look at this. Look how harmless this is. Look how not that big of a deal this is. Look how goofy this is. That's the next transition. Then once you flesh that out, now you have a small population by which you can grow that's, comprising less than 1% of the population, but it's still thousands of people. So you, by virtue of wealth, organize all those people into a unit. So they're so they know where each other are at, defensible position, then constant media coverage of that group, and then silencing of anybody that criticizes that group. And then you have your perfect movement that's going to cover up for the fact that our fertility metrics are going to crap. So TV series, The Fosters, Posse, these are mostly in the mid to late 2000s. Penny Dreadful, Mysterious Transgender Woman, Cream Sugar, 2016 to present. A lot of these shows didn't last very long. You have Xena Warrior Princess with a trans woman, with a show that ended in 2001, started in 1995. So kids watching afternoon dumb TV are going to be exposed to Xena Warrior Princess. They're probably boys are probably watching this show just to look at the main actress or whatever, and then they be like, look, here's a trans person. The Bold and the Beautiful, Law and Order Special Victims Unit. In season 4, so this started in 1999, so this is 2003. The L Word, which was a cultural agenda that I think ultimately didn't go as well as they wanted it to. Education of Max Bickford. Now, notice that a lot of these shows, if they feature a trans character, didn't last very long. Chris O'Donnell in 2.5 Men. Later, he got cast in the role on like one of the NCIS shows or something, I think. So be a trans person, and later we'll follow up and give you the role that you really want. Just Shoot Me. You have Jenny McCarthy is a trans woman, an all old college friend. Now, she's all plastic surgeryed up now, and she's not the best personality or whatever. I literally have my safe search on strict, and there's still safe search strict. Why are you showing me bikini photos? But anyway, so Jenny McCarthy is in 1994, and we're to believe that this is supposed to be a trans person. So just like the Raquel Welch thing, I mean, now they've gotten to the point where they're literally breaking people's jaws and stuff and putting cheekbone fillers and all these sorts of things in males to make them look more female, like they're reconstructing their faces too, along with all this other stuff, giving them implants and all that kind of stuff. But at the time, 1990 something, they're showing you somebody who's ostensibly desirable, let's say, even though we know her personality is terrible, and again, people have their own preferences or whatever. A legitimate model is selected to play a dude. So in the back of your mind, they're showing this image of this person that's all dolled out and being like, look, this used to be a man, which is absolutely ridiculous. Twin Peaks started in 1990, ended in 1991. Trans woman and FBI agent, played by David Duchovny. Pretty sure shortly after that got the X-Files. Mr. Robot is the trans person's the leader of the hacker group, I think. Night Court started in 1984. Married with Children. So one of the, I would say around the time of The Simpsons, they have, then in Married with Children, they cast Krista Allen, who's this person, who you may remember she was in the movie Liar Liar, famous model, all that kind of stuff. And just for a second, let me touch on, I literally have to put my safe search on strict now, because even on moderate, these search engines are putting up stuff that's there's no way kids should be seeing some of this stuff. There's no, and even based on certain search terms, it's like, this isn't even a directly, whatever thing that I'm searching for, just doing research for some stuff, or you'll use the terminology research or something in front of it. You got to be careful with some of this stuff, because they'll still pop up with legitimate nude images on moderate of people. So just be forewarned whenever you do research on this type of stuff. You got to be careful with this stuff. They're not even trying, because I can tell you 10 years ago, you wouldn't get images like this. They've literally gotten, the algorithms have gotten worse and more lax and are more likely to funnel you to stuff that's basically pornographic than they ever used to. But let's continue on with this discussion and the entire episode is about how all the guys are into her or whatever else. And then the reveal is this used to be a dude. So they're constantly doing this thing where they're trying to weaponize male libido and then say, this was really a guy the whole time. You're really into a guy. Gender's all relative or whatever else. And the connotation, of course, being if it's a guy, the libido is probably different. Their criteria is probably different. And maybe you got a shot, even though the reason that you're attracted to the person initially is because of how feminine they look. Again, Transparent, Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Nashville, Pretty Little Liars, Education of Max Bickford, CSI, focuses on illegal sex reassignment operations and features these famous trans people, basically to say we need to stop doing underground stuff. Ally McBeal, arrested for prostitution. Again, the reason, and you see this plot line over and over again. Why? Well, because people used to openly discuss how frequently you would see transvestite or transgendered prostitutes. It was a whole thing that was openly discussed because it's disproportionately so, and it wasn't something that was controversial to point out. Golden Girls. So this show started in 1985. Comes out as a trans man. Queer as Folk, Hung, Doom Patrol, L Word, Chicago Med, Dark Angel in 2000, titled Out. And this is like Warner Brothers, teen age people watching this network before it was, I guess, the CW now and stuff. So this is pre most of the proto CW show, and they cast an actual trans person to play a trans character, or to play a character on American television in 2000. So Nip Tuck, Gossip Girl, All My Children, Ally McBeal, Party of Five in 2020. So they reboot a lot of old shows and cast trans people in them. And if you look at this stuff, anytime there's a negative representation of anyone that's trans, Wikipedia goes out of its way to say it was controversial, it was problematic, instead of any of these other ones where, as we've seen in all these previous lectures, there are multiple reasons why you would want to dissuade individuals from going down this pathway. And given the outcomes that we see in this community, there's many reasons why you wouldn't want them to end up in this spot. Because we've seen just how disproportionately they kill themselves, heart disease, cancer, surgical complications, all those types of things that are worth trying to prevent. Can't make a story about that. Any of these stories that they have here represent a trans person that regrets being trans. Absolutely not. Even though there's people back then that regretted being trans. Any of them that talk about the complications of the surgery and the fact that you have a significant increased risk of being incontinent or infection. No. So they don't reference any of that at all. American Gods, a trans woman who is a demigoddess and protector of queer love. Oh, geez. Veronica Mars. The Jeffersons, started in 1975. Eddie is George's old army buddy, now a trans woman. Of course, it's not actually a trans woman. It's actually an actress. Star Trek Discovery, American Horror Story, and Married with Children. Again, they took one of the most feminine looking women they could find and say this is actually a dude in Married with Children. And then they also take a former high school football player guy who was ostensibly a masculine man's man or whatever, and flip him into a woman. Again, Mr. Robot, NCIS New Orleans, and Tales of the City. So if it's not an agenda, why is the messaging always the same? If it's not an agenda, why are they using the same tactics over and over again? If it's not an agenda, why is it following the exact same trajectory as all these other social movements and ultimately winds up in these people being given outsized support in society? Clearly, there's no way that you can get this done without substantial financial backing from powerful people. There's no way. Why do I feel confident saying that? Because most of these a lot of these early representations took place when the country was overwhelmingly majority Christian. Again, I'm not saying you have to be a Christian, okay? I'm not saying you have to believe in Christianity, okay? Just take it in cultural context here. And this would disagree with their value systems. So if you're trying to appeal to the majority of your audience to make the most possible money, why would you constantly put this subversive stuff in there? because it's not even about making the most amount of money. It's about pushing a certain agenda, and it's about reconditioning the way people believe. And this facilitates that perfectly. So you started out in an instance where you had basically theater and radio plays, and you had a captive audience in that small group, okay? Then you expand out into movies and television. And so everybody's just watching the same movies and television. So you basically know everybody that watches movies and television. There's only 3 TV channels. That's what's going to be present. So the people that controlled all that stuff at that point in time, that early on, were pushing this stuff, because we've seen how old some of these movies are. We've seen how old, newspaper stuff with Christine Jorgensen, the 1950s, 1897, a picture of a woman dressed as a man dressed as a woman, and washing the clothes and all that kind of stuff. So this power was consolidated a long time ago to be able to push this messaging. And it's still continued on into the modern internet and social media stuff. So it's ubiquitous throughout all those things through for that conditioning. So you should be asking yourself, who's powerful enough to do this? What movements are significant and protected enough to maintain this for all this period of time? Because it's still going to tie all the way back to the esoteric stuff that I talked about in the very first lecture. It's a religious / esoteric / occult ideology that pushes this stuff. And that's why we're manifesting that's why we're seeing what's being manifested in our culture today. It's not about popular opinion, because they've worked for decades to change popular opinion. They worked for over 100 years to change people's opinion on this issue because they knew they would be resistant to it. So you should be asking yourself who and why.